Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, scenes of rescuers sifting through the remains from a collapsed Miami area building are all too familiar to New Orleanians who remember the horror of the Hard Rock collapse. And while there are differences in the two disasters, there may be some similarities. We'll look back tonight at what we learned from the Hard Rock. In a week in which a casino for Slidell was being debated, we'll look at the politics of gambling as it evolved locally 3 decades ago. And in Baton Rouge, legislators may be making a return visit for a rare veto override session. Crime continues to steal the headlines, including statements from the mayor about what needs to be done. That plus a charter school that failed and a look at the life of former Lieutenant Governor Jimmy Fitzmorris are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Tyler Bridges, political reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And Ramon Antonio Vargas, reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. All right, let's go on over to David first. And, I mean, we see the scenes coming out of Florida of that condo building collapse, just heartbreaking and horrifying. And, of course, we remember what happened here with the Hard Rock. And just see those images, but it's kind of different circumstances, though.
Exactly. I mean, it's easy to make that comparison and to see it and remember how horrific it was in October 2019 when the Hard Rock construction site collapsed. But there's really some major differences structurally that we're starting to learn about. And one of the big comparisons is that it takes a really long time to figure out what causes something like this. And it's going to be maybe years before we learn what happened in Surfside with that condo complex. But they're already starting to look at some of the causes. And what we know about the Hard Rock is also not completely determined yet, but our investigations and investigations by OSHA and others have determined, at least to this point, that there are very clear allegations about structural problems on the upper floors, design problems, engineering mistakes or errors are being alleged by OSHA about the way that the upper floors were constructed and that it collapsed from the top down. By contrast, the condo in Surfside, Florida, appears to have collapsed from the bottom, and then the parts above it came down underneath because of failures at the lower levels. That suggests issues with the foundation, and we took a look at that comparison because one of the things that investigators and academics have been looking at is the issue of subsidence and issues in coastal Florida. This is a barrier island, and the land having issues of its sinking, and there was a study done last year by FIU professor who found that the land was sinking faster right under where that condo was, and that raised questions about whether there was a shift in the earth or something that caused the weakness. And there are major problems that are being identified by the Condo Association for years as well. And we know in New Orleans that we have a major problem with subsidence. We talk about New Orleans being like a sponge and the land sinking. But one of the things we found, and a geologist pointed out to us, is that we actually have a better situation here with stability because there's a layer called the Pleistocene, which refers to the era several million years ago, where there was a very strong, solid clay layer on the top here, and that's been filled in now by silt from the river and mud and other weaker materials. But it actually is only about 70 feet down to this heavier layer, this thicker clay layer, and that's where they drive piles in every major building, and it's really much more structurally sound, whereas it could be 400 feet down to a stronger layer. It's limestone in Florida. So there's a lot of concerns that in Florida it's actually weaker, and there's a lot of subsidence, and the areas where there's highways and a Mount Sinai Medical Center right there, they're finding there are higher levels of subsidence.
David, in both of these incidents, some of the early discussion was about the pool deck. Is that just coincidence, or is there something inherent about pool areas?
I think it's coincidence because what we found, like you point out, one of the initial things was there's a pool deck on the Hard Rock, and there was a pool being delivered, but that pool was not what caused the collapse. We were able to determine very clearly, and the pool that was placed up there already, and another pool was going to be delivered but hadn't been delivered yet, but the pool that was placed up there, that part of the building did not collapse. So it appears to have had nothing to do with the pool delivery. We'll see what happens with what they find in Surfside.
You know, when you see the images of what happened in Surfside and you just see those layers of concrete, it does really evoke, you know, both the video and the aftermath images of hard rock.
Yes.
You just can't help but sort of think about it, and it's just so horrific, and it just points out how difficult it is to handle something like that in a search and rescue.
Absolutely, and we saw how hard the search and rescue was here. Let's point out another major difference between these two cases. The hard rock was being constructed and was still being put up, whereas this building was 40 years old and actually was going through a 40-year recertification process when the collapse happened. But like you say, the actual search and recovery is very difficult. We had 3 men's bodies that were stuck in there for a very long time. 2 of them, they didn't get out for, I believe it was almost a year before they were able to get to those bodies. The process of removing the debris without causing additional damage or additional, you know, danger for the recovery workers is very tenuous.
And of course, yesterday the search and recovery operation had to be suspended for a while because they were concerned about the adjacent part of the building maybe being, that's still up there, but may not be safe.
Exactly, and you may recall that with the hard rock there were major concerns about how they were going to get in and do the, they did a detonation at first to remove the tower cranes, then they had to figure out a way to safely bring it down, and they actually allowed the demolition of some buildings nearby, and that was very controversial in order to protect people from additional potential disaster from the demolition process. So yes, it's very difficult.
All right, David, well, thanks a lot. I mean, it's just so heartbreaking to see those images out of Florida, and all those people are still missing, and of course those that we know we lost already.
Over 160 people, I think, are either confirmed dead or unaccounted for.
Yeah. All right, Dave, thanks a lot. Tyler, let's go on over to you. St. Tammany voters are going to have to consider a gambling issue. And so gambling now has been in our lives, in Louisiana, the residents' lives for about 3 decades now. It started out kind of little, but it's grown.
Yeah, the original idea, sold in 1991, was actually under Governor Buddy Roemer, and it was for riverboat casinos, and the idea was that they were going to cruise up and down the Mississippi River, sort of evoke the tales spun by Mark Twain with the paddle wheel boats. And soon after opening, the boats stopped cruising. They came up with very fanciful reasons. A light breeze on Lake Pontchartrain kept the Star Casino from cruising. The Boomtown Casino on the Boomtown Belle on the Harvey Canal didn't want to go at night because it was too dark. And same thing with the video poker, which was also approved in 1991 under Governor Roemer. It was supposed to be just at bars and restaurants, and today we have truck stops all throughout much of particularly the southern part of the state that have 50 video poker machines each, and so the boats these days cruise up and don't cruise at all. In fact, the legislature in 2018 said they could actually be on land. And if this casino goes through in Slidell, the election will be in November, that would be built actually on land. So the original idea was that the people would be given this in terms of gambling, but the door has been pushed open wider and wider and wider and wider. And now all forms of gambling exist in the state. And I have to say that state legislators are addicted to the gambling revenue.
And so it obviously, when this whole issue started, starting even with the lottery, there was opposition, and the opposition, I guess, has lessened over these decades. People are accepting it. It'll be before the St. Tammany voters for the casino in Slidell, right? The entire parish will have to.
Right. The public attitudes have clearly changed. St. Tammany Parish in 1996 voted against gambling, and now there's a good chance 25 years later that the voters of St. Tammany will approve that proposed casino in Slidell.
Tyler, when all this was happening, the idea of having gambling in boats that went out into the water was an easier sell to the public because they weren't part of the land. And so if you didn't like the idea, you can tell them to go away, to sail away. And so I think that made it more sellable. But the fact is, people didn't want to go out in the water any place. If you remember gambling, everybody thought New Orleans would be the real hot spot. You remember we had the Flamingo Casino, and then we had the 2 River City casinos. So there were 3 boat casinos downtown, and nobody wanted to go out in the water in there. They always wanted the flexibility. But once they got in place, and then once they can show that people don't want to go there because then the next step was to change the laws. And at one place, they had to be qualified to go out into the water. And they had like a captain and a crew, but they didn't have to go out in the water. And so it was step by step, which is kind of what happened on the Gulf Coast too, where you had to build on the water, but essentially on a barge, but not have to go away finally.
So all of that has changed. Where now we have the land casinos, casinos on land. How much does casino revenue contribute to the state budget? What does it support?
Yeah, it's equivalent to about 10% of the revenue that the state takes in every year. It's about equivalent to if the state raised the state sales tax by 1%, it would be about equivalent to the amount of revenue comes in from gambling. And point out that originally the land casino in New Orleans was supposed to be small. It was not supposed to have a hotel, any restaurants, and now the legislature later agreed to allow Harris to have a hotel, and now they've approved a second one and also restaurants. So again, the casino gets its foot in the door, starts producing revenue. Legislators think are convinced by the lobbyists for the casinos that it's better to have even more gambling and give them what they didn't originally have, and we've seen that in sector after sector, and now sports betting is coming to the state as well.
And employing, it's a big employer too now for the state. The different gambling facilities. Go ahead.
And the good thing about when casinos want hotels, that means they want to bring in the high rollers. And for any tourist economy, bringing in high rollers is a good thing to have. And now you have 2 hotels worth of high rollers coming in.
And that was the Harris argument in winning the approval for the first hotel, and that first hotel is full all the time, so Harris got legislators to agree to allow them to open the second one. What we've seen, though, is that the Kenner Casino is mostly local people spending their money there, so that cannibalizes the local economy. Same with the Boomtown Bell Casino in Harvey, but at least the Harris Casino does bring in some extra revenue. But all these new expanded forms of gambling, and actually in real terms compared to 1992, state revenue is down by 25%. When I say real terms, I mean in inflation-adjusted dollars. And what's happened is other states have gotten gambling as well, particularly Oklahoma and, Errol, as you mentioned, Mississippi. So there are the money coming in is actually not as much as it was before, and yet the legislature keeps approving more and more to try to make up that revenue loss.
And we are going to see whether or not there'll be another one built in Slidell. All right.
In November.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Ramon, let's go on over to you. And crime is just such a big issue in the city of New Orleans. And Mayor Cantrell recently laid out a crime plan after a survey showed that people are concerned.
I wouldn't so much call it a crime plan as much as she just, I think, sent the message that was like, I hear that that people are concerned. Obviously, the survey said that the sense of safety in New Orleans had cratered, right? And to the extent that you equate safety with crime, she put out the message really that, look, we've taken several steps already to try to prevent crime, to, in the case that fails, to apprehend any criminals, and after we do that, to intervene so that they don't reoffend and get them, with social services. And so what she outlined is going to be a lot of the, she made it a point to say that her plan and her administration's actions closely mirror the Biden-Harris federal crime plan unveiled recently. So you're talking a lot about recreational programs, like on the prevention side, to keep youths busy, job creation programs to keep young people and youths busy and paid so that a life of crime doesn't look like it's, doesn't look as attractive as just an honest day's work, housing and things like that. And then in the event that prevention fails, you're talking about using, equipping the police department to apprehend and to react to crimes that have already occurred and to investigate them. And so we're talking about the coronavirus relief plan, right? You're talking about $388 million that the city is expecting to receive, using at least a portion, an unspecified portion of that, to hire more police officers, to equip them better. Obviously, that is not what I think the reformist sector of the city wants to hear. But at the same time, her answer to that is, like, we do have programs already to people who are returning from incarceration, to put them in jobs, to put them in housing. And so, look, some of the programs that she outlined were in existence when the city recorded a 47-year low in the number of murders. I think it was 121 murders, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019. Right. The city is going to surpass that, is on pace to surpass that comfortably this year. But I mean, if you're the city, the thing that the drumbeat is, this is not just happening here. This is happening nationwide, yeah. And so people are trying to understand why it's happening across the country. And obviously, one of the stressors related to the sacrifices that people needed to make to slow the rate of the coronavirus spread during the pandemic.
Ramon, you cover a lot of these criminal incidents. You talk to, families, friends of victims, or else maybe a victim themselves. I mean, what are you getting? What's the read that you're getting from community members out there?
I mean, when the problem hits you, these people are. It's no longer theoretical for them, right? I mean, when you're talking to the niece of Portia Pollock, who was she was a woman who was stabbed to death and carjacked. Obviously, there were that case exposed, I think, some of the real life consequences of some of these policies in action. Right, that the suspect in that case had been in jail and on 2 armed robbery charges, and then had been released on reduced bond. And I think, even I don't think any of them are going to be lock everyone up, throw away the key type people. But at the same time, I mean, that's a decision that was made that resulted, that certainly, I mean, there's a pretty clear line from the decision to release that individual to this woman's death. And then I think once you see that, when you talk to them, you certainly get the urgency that the city should try to figure something out. It's just that there's a lot of different ideas about how to do it, and not everyone is thrilled to hear more police and spending more money on police. But at the same time, I think that a lot of people probably don't have a lot of patience for the idea of, like, well, this is the time to reduce police staffing and reduce police spending when crime is heading the opposite way.
So, not only that, but the police force is down to an all-time low, isn't it? Remind me, it's under 1,200.
It's 1,100. I mean, I don't know if it's like all-time low. I mean, it certainly is not at their ideal staffing level. At the same time, the city wasn't at its ideal staffing level. The police department wasn't at its ideal staffing level in 2019 when the city had its, like, historic low year, right? So that's what's hard. It's like it's never one factor that explains, and I think even the smartest people on crime that I know have a very difficult time explaining what drives crime levels from year to year.
Okay. All right, Ramon. Well, it's something that we'll continue to look at, that's for sure. Thanks a lot. Abe, over to you. Former Lieutenant Governor Jimmy Fitzmorris has passed away, and boy, what a guy he was.
Yeah, he'll always be remembered as the guy that came close to power. I'll explain that in a moment. Going back in the 1940s, after World War II, politics changed in New Orleans, I guess as it did across the country. You had all these soldiers that were coming back, and they were feeling powerful, and they got involved in politics. And during that time, Dallas Morrison, who'd been a state representative, ran for mayor and upset the machine. The machine boss was Mayor Maestri, and so Morrison became mayor, and he introduced a whole new of players in politics who were part of his organization. And Jimmy Fitzmorris was one of them. There were people that just gotten active in politics. Jimmy Fitzmorris is what I call the Lakeview Irish. There were a lot of young Irish who moved into Lakeview, which was a burgeoning area. And it was said about Fitzmorris that part of his political success came from being an usher at St. Dominic's, because that was always a high-profile thing when you were passing the basket. But he was very popular. He was handsome and very gregarious. Got elected to the council twice, to district council and then council at large. Then ran for mayor against Vic Schiro. And Schiro was an interim mayor. when Morrison had gotten a federal appointment, and he too it was everybody who was running was part of the Morrison organization, and they got into a runoff against Skiro, and Skiro won, and they said the reason he won was because of Hurricane Betsy, and he got a lot of publicity, with the president coming in and giving a lot of money. 4 years later, he ran for mayor again, and this time it was against Moon Landrieu, who was also part of the Morrison family, who had been a state representative, and he got into a runoff. This would have been in '69 against Landrieu, and I think this race was very historic because race was an issue, but not racism. It was the politics of race, and he got into a runoff against Landrieu, and there was this famous TV debate, which Fitzmorris would admit to, that this question was raised to the two candidates: if you're elected mayor, will you appoint a black person to head a city department? At that time, there hadn't been blacks heading city departments. And Fitzmorris gave a very proper answer. He says, I'm going to appoint the best person there is. I'm going to look for the most qualified person there is. Landrieu said, yes, I will. And so that was more direct. And so the politics was changing because the Voting Rights Act had passed. Blacks were a lot more powerful politically. There were new political organizations. Prior to that, in black politics, it was like the ministers and the church groups. Now you had things like Bold and Soul and Coup. And so all of a sudden, he had all these organizations behind him. And Landrieu won, bit of an upset. Right. Fitzmorris was elected lieutenant governor twice, ran for governor in '79, got into a runoff, and the runoff was contested. The Democratic opponent, Lewis Lambert got in the runoff against David Treen. Fitzmorris and everybody supported Treen, the Republican, and Treen won. And so he came close, but he was always gregarious and just very well liked.
And always the gentleman, and just shy of 100 years old.
In November, he would have been 100.
All righty, thanks a lot. Moving along quickly now. David, let's touch on Singleton Charter School.
Yeah, it's interesting. We just got this history lesson because James Singleton Charter School is named after Jim Singleton, who was part of that Moon Landrieu group that came in.
He was the Bold organization.
Right. And the Bold organization is very involved in the Dryads YMCA, historic YMCA, which ran this charter school since 2006. Now the school board is in the process of revoking their charter because of questions, financial improprieties. The CFO was recently arrested for allegedly fabricating criminal background checks for herself to cover up crimes, as well as other members of the school staff. So there's been a lot of controversy there. The issue here now is you got 300 kids who are about to go back to school in a month, and so even though there's a month-long process to revoke the charter, the school board is going to start immediately. The New Orleans Public Schools is going to start immediately placing those kids in new schools. And Jim Singleton, I had a chance to interview him to get his reaction. He's no longer involved in running the school, but it's his name on the school. He's going to be 88 years old next month, and he was, very disappointed and actually said that they were operating under the idea that the YMCA could use the school for money and that the money coming in for public school could be used to support the YMCA's activities. And the school board says that is absolutely not permitted, and the school is owed over $1 million, according to audits from the Dryads YMCA.
And so those children will have to now be placed in other schools a month before school starts.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Difficult situation. Thanks a lot, David. Okay, Tyler, over to you. Is there not going to be a veto override session?
The indications are that there will be a veto override session, and that this would be a historic event where this will be the first time that the legislature calls itself into this veto session, which would begin on July 20th. And this is a further example of how Louisiana's governors, which are always said to be among the most powerful in the country, that this is another sign of how governors have less political power, no longer able to choose the Speaker of the House, no longer able to choose the President of the Senate like they used to, and that the legislature itself would choose to go into this session where they would override the governor's veto. Again, it's going to be a historic change in Louisiana.
Be very rare. And so tell us about the legislation that he's vetoed that's causing this.
Yeah, there's particularly the bill involving transgender girls. It's really animating conservatives throughout the state. I talked to two legislators today who said that this is really a grassroots effort push to make the legislators agree to go back into the session and then vote to override the governor on that transgender bill, which the governor has said could threaten the holding of a major sporting event like the NCAA finals here. And then there's also the legislature approved a bill that the governor has vetoed that would allow people to get a concealed weapon without a permit. Again, conservatives in the state are up in arms against it and pushing their legislators to their elected officials to agree to the veto session and again override the governor.
So when will we know if indeed there is going to be this session?
Yeah, it begins. It would be so we'll know very soon. In the coming days, and again, that session would begin on July 20th and last just 4 or 5 days. And again, I think that to put it in the larger context, it's a sign again of a more independent legislature, something more like along the lines of what we have in Washington, where traditionally, again, in the state, the legislature has worked very closely. The majority of the legislature has worked closely with the governor, and that has changed.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Time for other stories, guys. Let's go over to you, E, first.
Well, firstly, in 1991, Jimmy Fitzmorris published this book called Simply Fitz.
Frankly Fitz. Yeah.
Yeah, Frankly Fitz. And there's a lot of stories, like 50 years worth of political stories. Good book. The problem is it came out around the same time as the Duke Edwards runoff, and that overshadowed everything. Yesterday, former Mayor Mark Morial came out with a very positive statement about Fitzmorris. Fitzmorris worked for the railroad, for Kansas City Southern, and is suggesting that the Union Passenger Terminal be named after Fitzmorris.
He was quite the guy, full of stories, too. Always great stories. Ramon, over to you.
Kenner native is missing in the Miami area condo collapse. We've been following her story. Her family is still awaiting word on her fate, and we'll continue to follow that story as that unfolds.
Thank you, Ramon. David, over to you.
A Catholic priest who's on the Archdiocese list of credibly accused clergy of sexual molestation has lost his law license, and Ramon and I have teamed up again in our Losing Faith series and have the story tonight both on Channel 4 and on NOLA.com.
Real quick, congrats to you two on that. You won a significant award on that series that you've done, so congrats to you.
Thank you.
Tyler, over to you.
Yeah, I want to just pick up on what Ramon was talking about with the crime and raise the question that since this is an election year, of course, New Orleans mayors is very difficult to beat when it's going back to Chet Morrison, as Errol mentioned, since the last time a New Orleans mayor was defeated for re-election. But could this crime issue become an issue for Mayor Cantrell? Could some formidable candidate get in the race because of crime to try to defeat her?
Good question, because it's an important issue. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining us. Thank you all, too, for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a happy, safe 4th. Have a good evening.